commercial airplanes. And now the beleaguered aerospace company is being sued for hundreds of millions of dollars, and this for refusing to return advance payments over canceled orders for its troubled 737 MAX. But what does the future hold for Boeing? Well, for this, we turn to legal journalist Molly Barrows, contributor with America's Lawyer. Molly, good to see you. But let's start with this. How has the coronavirus impacted the company?
Oh, my goodness. Boy, I bet Boeing just hates to look at the newspaper headlines in the morning when some of their leadership gets up. But I tell you, right now, they're slowly getting back to work. They've started production of some of their planes after the stay-at-home order was issued by the government last month. They're just now starting to get back to work on some of those commercial airplanes. But a lot of their facilities are still closed. And, this time last year in the first quarter, they had produced around 150 planes. This year, the first quarter, it's 50 planes. And that's down from the 60 that was projected. And you talk about operating with some loan money. They've got about $14 billion that they loaned, that they took out in loans to help with operating expenses. And because of these projections, also demand overall expecting to go down because of the coronavirus impacting the airline industry so hard. Overall, commercial plane production is expected to go down in the future. That loan number this year is expected to double to about $14 billion. So it's going to be interesting, Sarah, to see how they cope with some of these changes brought on by the coronavirus, as well as the other legal troubles that
they've had
face.
A lot of legal troubles even before the coronavirus, like the 737 MAX, the Boeing crashes, where they want to get those back up in the air within this year, by mid-year, that some say. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. They don't have word yet on exactly when those planes are going to be allowed to fly. They are working with industry regulators to determine when that is going to happen. Of course, as you know, they've been grounded since last year when they had those two almost back-to-back deadly airplane crashes caused by that faulty software in the anti-stall system. They hold about $52 billion in advances for those planes. They had a lot of orders for the 737 MAX, and now because, again, the demand is down, they are getting some requests back for that money.
Right.
And so it's interesting. There's a Kuwaiti leasing company that has now sued them just this week for $336 million, basically saying that Boeing has wrongly withheld that money when they've canceled the order that they had for 40 of those 737 MAX planes.
Well, and we may be seeing more lawsuits come up because we know China, we reported on this earlier, also canceled an order of 29 undelivered planes of their own. But Molly Barrows, contributor with America's Lawyer, thank you so much for that report.
Thank you, Sarah.
Time now for a quick break, but hang here because when we return, we're going to continue to follow the story of the rising unemployment numbers, not only here in the U.S., but across the globe. As we go to break, here are the numbers at the close.
The world is driven by dreamers, shaped by thinkers and those with vision.
Who dares, thinks. We dare to ask.
People are really remarking that 2020 is a mirror image of 2008. It's the exact same problem. Banks over-leveraged, blew themselves up, and are now demanding a bailout at the point of a gun from the Fed and other central banks. And except this time, the dislocation in the economy combined with the coronavirus is so great that we've tripped over into medievalism. That's how messed up this is.
Is your media a reflection of reality? In a world transformed, what will make you feel safer? Isolation or community? Are you going the right way, or are you being led somewhere? Which direction? What is truth? What is fake? In a world corrupted, you need to descend. So join us in the depths, or remain in the shallows.
As the price of oil continues to go down, the number of people unemployed continues to go up. And as people struggle while waiting for their government stimulus checks to hit their bank account, turns out dead people have already gotten their stimulus check. Well, for more on this and the latest numbers, we bring in Farron Franzak. Farron, on the surface, what's going on here?
All right, so again, surface level here. It does look really, really bad because, again, you do have dead people getting their checks, and the government has said that they do recognize that this actually is happening and they feel bad about it. But the problem is that it's actually a double-edged sword. See, the IRS is trying to send these payments out as quickly as possible because people are suffering. But each state, they keep track of death records, which are then reported to the IRS. But while the coronavirus is killing tens of thousands of people, there's a time lag, and it's ultimately inevitable that some dead people will get checks.
Do we know how many dead people have even received these checks?
So at the moment right now, no. But we do know that the IRS has issued $80 million in payments, and ultimately some 170 million people, they're going to get paid. But this, unfortunately isn't the first time that we've seen this little fiasco happen. Back in 2009, during the Great Recession, 52 million people got a check for $250, and 71,000 of those people, they were dead, which was a good $17 million and 1% of those payments given out. Well, now you have President Trump saying that, sometimes you just send checks to the wrong person and we're going to get that money back. But on the legal side of it, if, legal experts do say if you were alive when this stimulus bill was passed and then you died, technically you are entitled to that check.
Speaking of checks, now more people are also, they're not getting checks. What are the latest with the unemployment? We know it's hitting some record highs.
Oh yeah, so the Dow Jones actually projected that last week it was going to be 4.3 million people. Well, now it's actually higher. It's 4.4 million. Now you can see by looking here, the only good news really, Sarah, is that last week there was actually a decline of 810,000, but still it's 4.4 million. It's the equivalent to everyone in the entire city of Chicago and Phoenix filing for unemployment, believe it or not. Now, the Department of Labor comes out with their new rate calculation in about 2 weeks, but it's projected to be around 23%. The rate during the Great Depression was 24%. Now, the grand total over the past 5 weeks, it's 26.5 million. This has protesters continuing to take to the streets, and some states not even following these social distancing rules there and calling for the country to get back to work, arguing that these stay-at-home orders are destroying the economy.
My employer let half of us go, and those half are struggling. The half that are working, we're struggling because we don't have the other half.
But I'm looking to help the friends and family members that I know that have been impacted by this, laid off, and losing their businesses, on the verge of, can't sustain this very longer.
So I have friends and neighbors that own these businesses. They're dying. They're dying. There's a lot of businesses that will not be able to reopen.
Now, the House is expected to vote and approve the $484 billion coronavirus relief bill, which the Senate did pass on Tuesday. So now it's the House that's going to be sending it over to President Donald Trump's desk, which he has promised to sign it pretty quickly. Now, this bill is geared towards small businesses and hospitals, and another big chunk is $25 billion for coronavirus testing. And Sarah, this bill follows a similar one that was approved last week. However, that one actually ran out of money so fast. It's scooped up mainly by restaurants and hotels and national food chains, and that resulted in the latest bill being voted in the House.
Well, a lot of big businesses received some of these loans, and now the Trump administration is asking for them to return them. We'll see if that actually happens. Farron Franzak, RT correspondent, thank you for that report. More terrible news for the economy. These jobless claims are continuing to leap to these new historic highs. As Farron just reported, jobless claims continue to reach these highs in the United States, the 4.4 million people. Now, the numbers are higher than projected. In Europe, the numbers are similarly terrible. Well, in fact, new numbers show that as many as 60 million people across Europe could be out of a job within the next few weeks. This includes 55 million workers employed in high-risk professions. Well, joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg's co-host and investigative journalist Ben Swan. Ben, a lot of distress here as the economy really is ravaged by this coronavirus. Yeah. At this point, virtually all economic indicators are pointing to the worst downturn since the Great Depression. We've been mentioning that word for a few weeks now. It's been 6 weeks since the shutdown. How does the economy come back from this at this point?
Well, listen, I've been listening all throughout the show, Sarah, and I think every single guest you've had on has tried to answer that question. And I think everyone kind of comes back to the same point, which is that the economy is not going to be the same. You can't just flip a switch and bring everything back. And the longer this continues, the longer people are without work, the worse it will become. And certainly, you know, you heard those sound bites from people sitting in their cars at those protests who were saying that jobs aren't going to come back. Some businesses are not going to come back. I mean, there is an enormous weight that is on the economy right now as a result of this. And, you know, when you look at those numbers, and I know you alluded to it right here at the very end, right before you came to me, when you look at the numbers of the number of publicly traded companies that received $600 million of that small business bailout, it is disgraceful, and I think it should be criminal. To go in there and to essentially raid that money to say, well, we are a big Fortune 500 company, but we have subsidiaries, and our subsidiaries are going to suck up all that money. It's just disgusting.
Well, the Trump administration now saying that they're going to ask some of these businesses to repay or to return these loans, essentially. Right. How is that going to work, Ben?
I don't know if they'll return them or not. One thing that the Trump administration is doing to try to shame these companies into returning the money is they're actually going to publish a list of exactly what companies received money and how much they got. That actually might be a pretty effective way to get some of these companies to put money back. You know, Shake Shack returned $10 million when their name got floated out there. So other companies may do the same if they know. But I got to tell you, the one that I think is absolutely the worst of all of them, Harvard University. The fact that Harvard University got millions of dollars through this and then turned around and said, not only were they not going to repay it, they said, we're going to use it to help cover the cost of tuition for students who have been affected. Really? So you're going to pay yourselves that money? Meanwhile, they're sitting on about $40 billion in endowments. It's just disgusting.
It's not just Harvard. It's a few other universities as well, Ben. Yeah. And it truly is disgraceful here. And I hope that this list is published and then people will actually see it. But in Europe, some economists now expect the Eurozone employment also rate to double from the current rate right now that we're seeing at 7.3%. It could be as high as 15% in the coming months, even after accounting for the millions of people who remain on payroll but are technically out of work and losing some of this income. But who in Europe do you see as being affected the most?
Well, the people who are affected the most are the people who are affected the most here, which are small business owners and service workers. You know, people who work in hotels and in restaurants, those are the people who are being hurt the most. And remember, when you're a service worker, you are dependent on some business to reopen and to bring you back. And a lot of businesses are going to have to contract. So all those employees who are out of a job right now will not be getting a job when the lights come back on and the doors reopen. And so in Europe, we're looking at an enormous problem in terms of unemployment. And we're talking about, as you just said, 60 million people unemployed in the next few weeks. I mean, the number there is more than double what we're seeing here in the United States. So it's an incredible situation. And when you hear people use terms like a second Great Depression, those terms should not be taken lightly. It's a very serious situation for tens of millions of people around the world.
It really is, and we spoke with Professor Richard Wolff yesterday, who talked about the Great Depression, and let's not forget, these numbers are close to that. He also said to remind people that the Great Depression did not recover. The economy did not recover from the Great Depression for 11 years. It's a very long time. It's a very sad time. It's scary, pretty much, but you know, we have to keep an eye and do what we can to help and recover from all of this as we have been. So Bloomberg's co-host Ben Swan, thank you for your time with this.
Sarah.
That's it for this time. You can catch Boom Bust on demand on the brand new Portable TV app available on smartphones through Google Play and the Apple App Store by searching Portable TV, or stream us by your TV by downloading the Portable TV app on Apple TV and online at portable.tv. As always, check us out on youtube.com/BoomBustRT. We'll see you next time.
This is a story about what happens after a stray bullet kills a young girl in the street. What happens to her family?
My daughter's in Florida. My other daughter is buried in a cemetery. It really messes with your head.
What happens to the community?
The public was screaming for a scapegoat. The police needed a scapegoat. So why not choose a 19-year-old black kid with a criminal record? Who better to pin this on than him?
And what happens in court?
Bam, 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 bam. Shot after shot was fired. Our society, we failed that little girl.
We don't know who killed Genesis Rincon. And at the end of this trial, unfortunately, you too will still not know who killed Genesis Rincon.
Приехали, забрали и везли с мигалками, как будто я вот прямо сейчас умираю.
Un poquito más, ya está. ¿Duele? Sí. Ay, ya está.
I was on the floor some days in my bathroom, crying, praying.
Because I was pregnant, it was difficult. Even when I went into A&E, they weren't too sure where to put me and what to do.
As time progressed, it got worse. I was having chilling fever. I didn't have any sense of taste or smell.
Вспоминаю марсианина, как вот вроде планета здесь. Но есть такое ощущение, на самом деле, что ты сидишь в тюрьме.
There was so many times I honestly thought, well, this is it.
I have to do this now. Push myself. I've got to do this for me and the baby. I've got to. I've got to.
Hello and welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Naomi Caravani, guest host and purveyor of new quarantine hobbies. It's basically a different world we live in since last week. The Pope recommended universal basic income. Joe Biden is a YouTuber. Burning Man will be streaming online this year. And I think I might be a person who's into wind chimes. We've put together a great show for you tonight. On tonight's episode, Lee Camp sits down with economist Richard Wolff, professor emeritus of economics at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and formerly a professor of economics at Yale and the New School, among others. He's also the founder of Democracy at Work and host of Economic Update on YouTube. And they have a very interesting conversation about workers' strikes. Then I go into aggressive policing, and redacted correspondent Anders Lee does some fact-checking on voting. But first, let's go to that discussion between Lee Camp and Richard Wolff.
Professor Wolff, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Lee. Glad to be here.
I don't know anyone better than you to diagnose the problems right now. We're looking at an economic crisis, possibly 30% unemployed, people suffering across the country and around the world. If only someone had told us that such a crisis might happen, if only there had been some kind of warning signs, but instead, no one could see that capitalism would have such a problem. Is that right?
Well, there's a few of us, but basically you're right. The consensus was that we were doing really pretty well. The president's absurd claim that the economy was great, or even the greatest in the world, was one thing that people winked at each other about, but not enough to really make a counter argument or a counter assessment that it was as weak as it has now shown itself to be. If I could just make the point in a different way, this is the third crash of capitalism in this new young century. In 2000, in the spring, we had what came to be called the dot-com crash. In 2008, we had what came to be called the subprime mortgage crash. And now in 2020, we have the third one, the so-called coronavirus crash. The game here is giving a name to each crash as if the cause and explanation is entirely on what the trigger was. Yeah. But that's a mistake. That is a economics mistake. You give a kind of a student a C- for making that mistake in his or her freshman year. Here's the point. We have had the problems that existed in 2000, 2008, and now many times in history. In 2000, it was the excessive prices of dot-com stocks. In 2008, it was a sizable number of our people being unable to pay the mortgages they had taken out for their homes. And this time we have a viral pandemic. We have had overpriced stocks many times. Yeah. We have had people unable to cover mortgages many times. And we have had dozens of viral pandemics over the last century. The trigger isn't the problem. It's a problem of a system which, when triggered, collapses. And that's because it has all kinds of internal problems that people were pretending either weren't there or didn't matter.
Yeah, I like that. Give it a name to throw people off the scent of the actual cause.
Exactly.
There's been a lot of talk about how America hasn't had enough protective gear for medical workers. We haven't had enough ventilators. But in the past, during a crisis like World War II, we forced corporations to make warplanes. They started doing it overnight. Why can't we get enough ventilators? Why aren't we able to produce what we need in this country?
I think it's basically, to make it blunt, a kind of abject fundamentalism in economics, which says anything that the private sector does, anything done by capitalists to make profit, is the right way to go about doing it. So capitalists shouldn't be told what to do by the government. If anything, it should run the other way, because the capitalists who pursue profits are the geniuses, the stable geniuses, of course, who do everything right. The truth is pretty close to the opposite. It wasn't profitable for companies to make masks or tests or ventilators or beds or hospitals or gowns for the people who work in hospitals. It wasn't profitable to make them, and it wasn't profitable to stockpile them around the country so they'd be ready now. So that's why private sector didn't do it, and the government, literally fawning in front of the private sector, didn't come in to compensate for what the private sector failed to do, so we were unprepared. But let me say, as an economist, we have already lost 50 times more wealth by failing to take those preparations than it would have cost us to produce all that stuff and stockpile it. Capitalism's decision, in view of this pandemic, was stupefyingly inefficient.
In a column that I honestly am not quite smart enough to understand, Ellen Brown said that the door has been opened for nationalizing the Federal Reserve because she said, and this is a loose quote, basically the federal government is nationalizing large swaths of the financial markets. The Fed is providing the money to do it. BlackRock will be doing the trades. This scheme essentially merges the Fed and the Treasury into one organization. What are your thoughts about that? Is that a door opening to the nationalizing the Fed, or what does that mean?
I think I understand what Ellen was trying to get at, and she's quite right. What we're seeing here is basically the private credit system freezing up, and it's clear for everybody to understand why. Over the last 20 years, in response to the crash in 2000, and again the